Good evening, I'm Kathy Lewis. Tonight we bring you an editorial roundtable, a bit of a discussion of the headlines here on What Matters. Joining us tonight, Bill Crescenzo, who is the banking, finance, and maritime industry reporter with Inside Business Magazine, political blogger and Virginian Pilot columnist Vivian Page, and from Regent University, distinguished professor of the Robertson School of Government, Dr. Chuck Dunn. Thanks to all of you for being with us tonight. We appreciate it very much. Boy, what a week. We just, yesterday, of course, the biggest news out of Washington, two big stories. We'll talk about both of them. One has to do with the White House, Chuck Dunn kind of digging in its heels on this question from the House Speaker saying, you know, really, this Libya thing has been going on a long time. War Powers Act requires you to come back and ask for justification. The president is saying, wait, it's just about Gaddafi. It's just about Gaddafi.
Right. It's more than that, and I don't understand why the president is digging in his heels. We have to back up that the World War II was the last time there was the exercise of the Declaration of War clause pursuant to Article 1. We have the Commander-in-Chief clause in Article 2. So what we have is a pitting of the two against each other. But of course, the War Powers Act of 1973 was supposed to clarify everything. Well, it's done anything but clarify. I happened to worked on the Hill for several years and also did my doctoral dissertation on this very subject. And so what we've had since World War II is these non-declarations of war, police actions, for example, in Korea and Vietnam. So the War Powers Act says, okay, the president can send in troops for 90 days, but at the end of 90 days, he either must begin to withdraw the troops or he must get authorization from the Congress. President says he doesn't have to get authorization from the Congress.
Because he says it's about Gaddafi. It's not about engaging necessarily the state of Libya.
That's correct. But then Speaker Boehner says, but we have our military there. They are in a war zone, and it's costing us a lot of money. But the larger issue, I mean, sure, there's a constitutional issue here, but the really big issue to me is political. Why is the president inviting this kind of opposition? You know, conceivably, the Congress, the House, could vote articles of impeachment. I don't think they would do that. And the Senate, of course, could have a trial.
But you think this is a risky move, particularly given 2012 on the horizon?
Very risky on his part. Right now, you know, 61% of the American public thinks that we're going the wrong direction. They're very concerned about what's happening in the Mideast. And President Obama's power base to the far left of the Republican Party, of the Democratic Party, wants us out of there. And here he is really fueling the fire of discontent among his people.
So, Vivian, has he called you yet?
No, he didn't.
He hasn't got you on the speed dial,
about that. No, afraid not.
Yeah.
I think there's obviously the president is a constitutional scholar, so he must know something that some of the rest of us don't know. I don't know what he's doing. I mean, I really don't know what he's doing and what he's thinking, but obviously he just knows better than we do, maybe.
The other interesting story that developed this week, of course, had to do with Congressman Anthony Weiner, and the president said, look, if it were me, really, I would go. And late this week, yesterday, Congressman Weiner says, okay, I'm done. No really other choice in that.
No choice at all. It is interesting to see the number of scandals that have taken place and how people have responded. But Weiner obviously didn't have all his ducks in a row before he decided to kind of dig his heels in and not resign right away. The process whereby he tried to first say that he didn't send the tweet, and then, you know, defended it for about 10 days before he finally came clean, and then all the other things that have come out since. I think it's probably best that he went away. It's unfortunate.
And as you note, the decision came right as his wife returned home from her trip.
His wife came home, so the question is how quickly will we hear about them getting the divorce. But for me, the bigger issue was Weiner is obviously a flawed man, but his voice voice on the Hill was so important, and he was such a tremendous progressive voice in terms, particularly when we got into the health care issues and stuff like that. I hate to see that voice gone, but I understand, and certainly I was one of the ones who felt like he should leave because of what he had done. So.
You know, I have to wonder, though, this social media thing I think is such an interesting phenomenon in terms of the way it changes lives. I was talking with someone recently who's in her early 20s, and she said, you know, I think because we've lived all of our lives in this social media universe, we are not going to think these things are as big a deal when they break. I mean, there will come a time, she posited, that, you know, maybe this won't be as important, and this will just to me, the issue in the Weiner case was about, you know, the lying and the saying,
right.
and the thing that was intriguing to me about this, and both of you are political folks, so you will appreciate this. The cardinal rule is that if you have bad news, you get it all out, you get it all done right away.
Exactly.
So there's no follow-up story. And I wonder in this case, I mean, perhaps he would not have survived, but I do wonder if he had come out and said, boy, you know, I've got a problem, I'm taking the cure, I'll be seeing you in 90 days. I mean, you know, was it Congressman Kennedy basically did that, disappeared from the scene.
I figured that that's what he was going to do. I mean, I really thought at the very beginning that what was going to happen was that he was going to pull a Tiger Woods and check himself into a sex clinic place and go from there. But there is a certain ego that goes along with being a politician, and part of that ego that makes you run for office is the ego that also says I'm above the law, and that therefore I can do things, and people just won't. People, you know, if I stand up there and say I didn't do it, then that'll be enough.
Take the line from Sir Walter Scott: "What a web we weave when at first we practice to deceive." Right. Tell the truth, tell it immediately. Let's back up to Richard Nixon. People who opposed him said, if he had simply told the truth from the beginning, I would go to the White House and say, Mr. President, you need to stay in office. These were Democrats saying that about Richard Nixon.
Wow.
So Weiner violated the first most fundamental principle, and that is tell the truth about what you've done.
That's right.
There's also the thinking that because he's a New York politician, that there was a lot more focus on him as a politician versus I believe the senator in Louisiana who was caught with a prostitute, because the New York press is, you know, they are the tabloid press there. They will not let it go.
Despite your accent, you would know because you spent a number of years in New York.
I did, and I wrote for one of the tabloids, real estate, not politics. But so there was no getting, you know, he could have come and said, okay, this was what I did, but they wouldn't have let it go. They would not have let it go.
Yeah. That's amazing. Well, Bill Crescenzo is the Inside Business Magazine's banking, finance, and maritime industry reporter. You've been covering some really interesting, doing some really interesting work on the future of Hampton Roads bank shares and Commonwealth bank shares. Give us the background there and where we are.
Well, they are very well-known community banks here in Hampton Roads, and for a very long time did very well, but pre-recession and during the recession, they had a lot of bad loans. Now they are bleeding money and doing what they can to plug the hole up. Hampton Roads bank shares raised $295 million in capital last year. Commonwealth bank shares is considering raising capital, but a lot of things to become solvent. And both, in fact, are under investigation by the Fed. So they've got a lot of housekeeping to do, which they readily say that they have to.
And you wrote that they've admitted, Commonwealth Bank Shares anyway, admits that it had poor control over its internal financial reporting procedures and that it has, quote unquote, substantial doubt about whether it will continue to operate.
Well, that's from the SEC filings, and they don't know. I spoke with the president a couple weeks ago, and he actually said that he's got a big dog in this fight. It's his career, it's his future. He said the investigators were there as we were speaking. So they're doing what they can. They're doing what they can to to become solvent again, focusing on community banking, not focusing on so much the big loans, the commercial loans.
And we are seeing some return to that, I think, in this community, although it's beginning to shake out a little bit in terms of healthy banks and banks that aren't as healthy.
Yes, because there are some healthy banks here. Monarch Bank, Town Bank, Old Point, Heritage, which Heritage is one of the smaller ones, but they have really focused on small businesses and businesses that will do well in this economy versus ones like restaurants and hotels and that type thing.
Wow, it's a tough business to be in. One wonders whether, when you talk about the results of the recession and the lessons learned, you still have to wonder whether we've learned a lot of lessons out of this, Chuck Dunn. I just observe the same bonuses happening and some of the profiteering here, and one wonders whether any lessons have been learned.
Yes, and we have to be doubtful that people have learned lessons from this. Our society, our culture, the changes that have taken place, things like this did not happen, for example, going back to the 1950s. There, you had the small town banks, very personal, you knew people, you didn't loan unless you knew them. Now we do so many things distant. We don't know individuals, and we're on the web. The internet has consumed our lives, and that's affected how we live and how we do business. So there aren't the checks and balances on our lives that we used to have.
It's interesting you talk about that, because I was over the weekend talking with some colleagues, and they were saying, we were talking about the use of the term friend. That, I think in a certain generation you thought of a friend as a noun. You didn't think of it as a verb. It's a whole different world, right? And Vivian, you're really concerned about this because of the impact in terms of civic engagement at the local level.
Right. You look at going, you talk about friends, and you realize that these people who are your friends are people that you don't know.
You probably couldn't have 1,500 of them.
It'd be kind of hard. I mean, if I really restricted my Facebook page to my friends, I think it would be like 3. But that ends up, when we're staying on the internet, we're not necessarily paying as much attention as we need to be paying with what's going on right here underneath our noses, what's happening and what's affecting us every day. I talk about it as much as I can, both on my blog and in my column, about how critical it is to stay focused on what's happening right here, because these are true pocketbook issues. If Commonwealth Bank shares goes under, then there's a ripple effect of those things happening right here. We've got the head of the organization who lives here, so there goes those resources. We've got a lot of stuff. So we've got to pay attention to the whole process of what's happening right here locally.
And you attended the redistricting meeting for the city of Norfolk, and just hang with us for a second. If you don't live in the city of Norfolk, there's some reasons why this is important, and it gets a little bit in the weeds. But the concern that you had is this was important, and there were a very few number of people there.
It's important for all of us. Redistricting happens once every 10 years, and so once we do a census. And folks that come and go from the region sometimes don't understand why certain things happen a certain way. Why is it that this happens? Well, because no one was fighting 10 years the last time. So here we are in Norfolk, and all the localities are undergoing redistricting. Norfolk happens to be a little bit more out front and out in public. Thank goodness we've got some members on council who believe that we should do things on a transparent basis. But we have a redistricting public hearing, and because it wasn't clear when the meeting was going to be, and I know I'm going to get chastised by City Council once again for saying this, but it wasn't clear when the meeting was going to be, and so very few people showed up, and a lot of people didn't come because they thought that the plans that they had seen, well, it didn't affect me, so why should I show up? Never dawned on them that someone might walk in the door and present a totally different plan, something totally different from just the nibbling around the edges.
So one of the things we're seeing that's interesting in City Council, every City Council has its own dynamic. There's a power agreement, and when that gets mixed up, things get really interesting. What are you observing right now in Norfolk City Council?
There's a change coming in Norfolk. What we're seeing is that we actually have, it's almost a generational thing, that that we've got a couple of younger members who've come on council who are not coming from the establishment that has run Norfolk for so long and have a different way of thinking about things. They want to be more inclusive, they want to be more open, they want to do everything above board, and so that's in direct conflict with the way Norfolk has been run for so long. I've lived here since 1978. I've watched how Norfolk has evolved or not evolved, depending on how you look at it, over that period of time. So we've got a couple of young guns on the council now who are trying to move the pile forward. They're hitting resistance. They're running up against some resistance. I think we, as the citizens who are active and involved, will try to get more people who are actively involved and try to give them some help.
It's this issue of engagement, though, is a really tough situation. I think, Bill, you were at the Inside Business breakfast last week when we were talking about, earlier this week I should say, when we were talking about this idea of 5 generations at work and the different ways in which generationally people are existing in the workspace. And there's this idea you see in younger generations where there is very little loyalty, and to be frank, I mean, really, who can blame them? As we said, they've watched their parents get crushed by the collapse of the middle management jobs, but they will. We had one of the speakers say they will go across the street for a quarter more an hour. I mean, it's more about the experience than about just the pay.
Well, my colleague Danielle Walker was actually there, but she wrote a story for next week's paper, and yeah, I mean, the times have changed. I mean, as you said, you're not going to go to a company and expect to be there for 20, 25 years anymore. And also, too, I think that there is I wouldn't say it's an immaturity, but it's more of where, with again, going back to social media, there's a disconnect between the younger people growing up. I don't want to sound like an oldie here,
Yeah.
I mean, because I'm not an oldie, but I think that with the social media and the computers, that people spend so much time online,
right,
and communicating through texting, that there's a disconnect in the real life, in the real world. And
is that becoming the real world? See, I think that's a really
it's the virtual world.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think anything will ever take the place of one-on-one interaction, unless of course everybody's
doing it.
Well, that's
right?
true.
That's
very true.
That's the thing,
Yeah.
because we say, well, they're not doing it like we did it, and I'm really worried about that. But maybe that's just, I don't know. Maybe it's the progress of time.
Maybe we're going to have implants in our heads.
One wonders.
One
wonders.
Certainly are going to be able to do video chat on every device that you've got, and as opposed to, right now the texting is the big thing, but we're getting more and more devices now that have video chat on them.
I have seen enough in video chat. I don't want to.
Do you Skype? Do you Skype?
I have.
I mean, Skype is one big way of doing it, but there's
so many. And the candidates are embracing all of this too. I mean, you really see this.
Well, you have to, because there's not a campaign out here that can be run off of the old knees that I've got, not yours. So you have to figure out how to engage younger people, because if you don't engage the younger people, you really won't have the people that you need.
So we have a big Senate race coming up here in just a little bit of time, and it's shaping up to be very close, very interesting one. You've got
and it's one of the biggest in the country, and there are several big ones.
This is Senator Jim Webb's seat. Senator Webb having announced that this is the interesting thing to me about him. It's like, he came to the Senate and he said, I have something I want to do, and that's GI Bill, and he got it done. So okay, I'm done. And that's so unusual, isn't it?
I got to give him credit for that. Yeah. Most people look upon, hey, I get in there, I'm going to make this a lifetime.
Yeah.
So hand it to him.
Who's in the running here?
So we have Allen versus Kane. They're two credible candidates, both former governors, strong candidates. Now, each of them has some problems, some liabilities, but I would say from the standpoint of Virginia, each party is offering a really creditable person. Put it in the national context, which these Senate races, we must put them in. We have a situation where unemployment being very high and the direction of the country being perceived by most Americans as the negative side of things, those things will affect the outcome. Now, Virginia, the unemployment rate is not above the national average. National average is 9.1. We're way below that. Right. But still, it's that perception that will influence this. So in a close race, that would tend to turn the race to Mr. Allen. But as the race moves along, we have to remember the macaca moment, and could have some other moments either from Kane or from him.
Yeah.
But I think it's going to be a great race.
Yeah.
I think it's going to be close right up through, because there's this lack of enthusiasm on the part of both the supporters in both parties. I mean, Allen has got his problems with the Republican Party. Kane has his problems with the Democratic Party.
So what are their problems with each of the parties?
Oh, well, I think the Republican Party would like to have a more conservative candidate than what they think Allen is, and the Democrats would like to have a more progressive candidate than what they think Kane is. I mean, that's just the bottom line. So, but I think that we're far enough out that a lot can happen between now and next year. And don't forget that they'll be running down ticket from the presidential race. Who the Republicans nominate. Yes, the economy is going to matter. Yes, the unemployment rate's going to matter. But so is who is at the top of that ticket. We already know that Barack Obama is going. I don't think there's anybody on the Democratic side that's going to challenge him. The question is which of the characters is going to end up being the Republican nominee. My guess at this point would have to be Romney. And if Romney's at the top of the ticket, then you'll have that will bring along with it some other things with George Allen.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of pieces yet.
Romney at the top of the ticket, you see that?
Well, it's Romney's race to lose. He did what he needed to do in the New Hampshire debates. He didn't stub his toe. If he continues to do this, he's likely to be the nominee. And then you pit someone with chief executive experience whose calling card is jobs and the economy.
Right. In a
So
time
it'd
when
be a plus.
jobs and the economy are tough.
Right. And then we have to put this in the context of, here's this 9.1%. No incumbent running for re-election for second term has won re-election since Franklin Roosevelt when there's been a 7.2 or above unemployment. And
So is this Franklin Roosevelt times, though?
What was the unemployment rate when Reagan ran his second term? It was pretty high. We were talking about this the other day, and I don't remember the exact number, but at the time it was pretty high. Sometimes it's hard to look back and say, is there a way? There's so many dynamics.
See, that's what I wonder about, whether this moment is perceived as a 30s moment. I don't know.
We can't tell that yet, but we can say what economic data tell us. And the economic data say right now, President Obama is in serious trouble. Look at the 11 states with 270 electoral votes. That's the exact number you need to win. 9 of those states, the unemployment rate is above that magic number. Okay. And in 5 of those 9, it is 10.38%. Well, he's got to do extraordinarily well among the big electoral vote states, the 11 of them, in order to win. If we look at those states that were considered like Colorado and North Carolina as the ones that you've got to win, the battleground states, he's in trouble there with regard to unemployment.
Well, I wish I could tell you we will continue the conversation, but we will be ending our run on What Matters next week. So I want to thank all of you for being part of this conversation from time to time. I'm deeply grateful and appreciative. It's an unfortunate moment, and because I feel like we've brought some interesting programs to people's attention, and so I want to thank each of you for your role in
It's a great show.
Making that happen.
It's a part of the culture of Greater Hampton Roads, an important part of the culture here.
I'm really disappointed to see the show go away. I would like to think that we have a mechanism for having more conversation at the local level. We are slowly but surely continue to lose the ability to create this community that we have here and to allow us to have some shared experiences. This is what matters, and shows like it do. And when it goes away, then it's a loss for all of us.
I think that is the thing to keep in mind at the end of it all. We don't know sort of what format it takes or what way it comes at us, but that conversation is just critically important. I will go out on a limb and agree with you on that one. Thanks to all of you for being with us tonight. I'll be back in just a moment with a final thought. Well, as you know, this program and the one that follows it will cease production at the end of this month. And this is a result in part of Governor McDonnell's stated agenda to end taxpayer funding for public broadcasting. No one should be surprised that funding was going away. After all, Public broadcasting was the only entity the governor singled out for elimination in his State of the Commonwealth address, carried with the greatest possible irony only by, you guessed it, Virginia's public broadcasters. But Governor McDonnell is not alone. The governors of Florida and New Jersey are the latest to point their veto pens toward public broadcasting. Even many who oppose public funding profess to appreciate public programming, and that creates an opportunity for a robust debate about how we carry it forward. There are some interesting options out there. We could adopt the British model and tax televisions and radios. But as more people consume their media on demand and on portable screens, that boat may have sailed. An idea I'd like to learn more about is one that would tax commercial broadcasters to create a trust fund to support public broadcasting. After all, the airwaves are owned by the public, an important point that often gets lost in the conversation. And supporters say it isn't really very much different than the fees concessionaires pay to do business in parks and along turnpikes. Taxing commercial broadcasters would deliver public broadcasting from the periodic slings and arrows of the political process. And if that idea doesn't pass muster, there must be others to consider. In any case, I hope public broadcasting executives are looking at all the options and not putting all of their eggs in the congressional basket, what with a 2012 election looming in which public broadcasting is shaping up to be a litmus test. Well, we invite you to join us next week at this time. It'll be our final broadcast, and the conversation continues on the air on Hearsay on 89.5 this week, 89.5 WHRV. Thanks so much for being with us tonight, and we'll see you next time for another look at what matters.